Pictures signed Henny to a contract and created the Hollywood Ice Revue.
Her show usually had about 60 professional skaters, great choreography, costumes, the works. Very, very elaborate show.
The enormous sums brought in by the Ice Revue secured the stadium's financial future.
And there was a certain mystique about watching her on the ice. And she was something else, a big moneymaker for the Chicago Stadium.
Henny would go on to become a star on the Hollywood screen, paving the way for future performers like Barbara Ann Scott and Peggy Fleming, both of whom entertained stadium audiences. Arthur Wirtz created events to fill the stadium.
Well, he's a fantastic, a great businessman, but also impresario. I mean, that take arenas that were built as convention centers and to make them entertainment centers.
The rodeo was just one of the attractions he produced. It featured such personalities as Roy Rogers, who, according to legend, proposed to Dale Evans backstage at a stadium roundup. The stadium was home to the Cole Brothers Circus, which entertained generations of Chicagoans, and was made possible by the vision of Arthur Wirtz.
You took students to come and visit before the show the elephants and the tigers and the lions, and to see the expressions on their face was something I've never forgotten.
Creating a circus atmosphere of their own, the world-renowned Harlem Globetrotters were one of the first basketball teams to play at the stadium.
And they played out of Chicago. And one of the major venues, of course, was the stadium. They were the great basketball draws throughout the 1950s. They were more popular than any NBA team was.
College basketball made its way into the stadium in the 1940s with weekend doubleheaders. The games were a tremendous draw among college fans. Popularity grew to a point where in 1967, even the storm of the century could not keep spectators away from seeing college basketball's greatest player.
And it was the craziest thing. You look down the street and here comes the people. It just looked like a horde, an army marching down Warren Avenue and Madison Street, because this was Lou Alcindor, the greatest basketball player that anybody had ever heard of, and everybody wanted to see him.
But when it came to basketball, or any other event for that matter, nothing brought more magic to the stadium than the genius of Michael Jordan.
There has never been an attraction like Michael, but then there's never been a performer like Michael. And he was without a doubt the most important sports figure of our time, and maybe the most important figure, without the word sports attached to it.
Let's do it for Chicago. Let's do it for Mayor Kelly, for George Brown, everybody. Let's get together. Put this thing over, please.
The stadium has been Chicago's gateway to the entertainment world throughout the years. A major vehicle delivering the finest in entertainment to the stadium was Irv Kupcinet's Harvest Moon Festival, an annual evening of song and dance where a young Frank Sinatra made his stadium debut.
We would line up the kids who do all the latest dance steps. Their competition was remarkable because they were wild dancers. And to embellish that, we brought in a whole flock of stars from Hollywood, and Frank Sinatra was one of the biggest, Milton Berle, Jack Benny.
The renowned Gate 3.5 at the west end of the stadium welcomed the incomparable Bob Hope to Chicago, as well as the old crooner Bing Crosby. The unforgettable Jimmy Durante was yet another favorite who brought Hollywood to West Madison Street.
And in one year, we had Sinatra, Como, and Colombo, the three greatest singers of the year, all on the same stage at the same time. That was the apex of the thing.
In later years, performers such as Red Buttons, Danny Thomas, and Paul Anka would grace the stadium stage.
And that Harvest Moon Festival, the money of which went to charity, will fill the stadium for about 25 years and 25,000 people every year.
Jazz sensation Ella Fitzgerald rivaled the Barton pipe organ on the decibel scale. And speaking of noise, only a Saturday night Blackhawks crowd could match the screams heard at a Command performance by Elvis Presley. From the kings of comedy to the king himself, for over 60 years, the stadium has been Chicago's venue to the stars.
And I hope that everyone will try to be there on December the 20th at the Chicago Stadium.
Contrary to popular belief, Chicago earned its reputation as the Windy City not from its blustery climate, but by the renowned banter of its politicians. And at no time has the focus on Chicago been greater than during the national conventions of the 30s and 40s.
It was a perfect place for that. They built the stands so that everyone could be, they'd sit low and they could look up and watch them, and it was a very ideal setting.
The platform of the 1932 Democratic and Republican conventions held at the stadium centered on two key issues: the Depression and, more important to some, Prohibition.
As soon as we can get enough of the platform committee sober enough to turn in a platform, we'll be through.
Amid beer raids by the Chicago police on nearby Halsted Street, the Democrats, it appeared, were ready for an end to the dry spell.
Recommend the passage by Congress of a resolution repealing the 18th Amendment to the Constitution.
While Republicans maintained a more Puritan posture.
The Republican Party has always stood and stands today for obedience to and enforcement of the law as the very foundation of orderly government and civilization.
In the case of the Democratic Party, the party owed a lot to Chicago because beginning with Roosevelt's victory in '32, Illinois, and especially the Chicago Democratic Party, was a major ingredient in his success.
The Republicans' passion for anti-repeal was exceeded only by their enthusiasm for their incumbent candidate, Herbert Hoover.
As the next President of the United States, I nominate him, and I give him to you as your candidate, our great, glorious Californian, Herbert Hoover.
It was in the 1932 gathering that Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced the New Deal. Following his victory, the country's new president shared his vision in a speech at the stadium.
As your commander-in-chief and as your comrade, you I have called to the colors again.
Franklin Roosevelt and Chicago Mayor Anton Cermak maintained a close relationship. The two were together in Florida when an assassin's bullet intended for the president struck and killed Cermak.
And he made that memorable comment, "I'm glad it was me instead of you," which was probably put into his mouth by some newspaper man. But it's part of the legend of his assassination.
Chicago honored their fallen leader in a wake held at the stadium.
One of the great events of the Chicago Stadium, not a happy event, of course, but one of the great events of the stadium.
A state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
By the end of the decade, the nation's focus turned to the war in Europe, as the stadium would host yet another Democratic National Convention in 1940. Despite immense popularity, President Franklin Roosevelt faced opposition from high ranks within the party. But a mysterious voice from the bowels of the stadium would leave no doubt about the nomination.
And throughout the balloting for FDR, the voice came that nobody knew where it came from. We want FDR, America wants FDR, Chicago wants FDR. And this voice from the sewer kept boomeranging throughout the whole, during the entire vote. Of course, FDR won easily, but this is the part of the